So when it came to marriage and divorce, Deuteronomy 24, God gave the people of Israel through Moses, his servant, his mediator, a certificate of divorce. When it came to Sabbath keeping, the Deuteronomy 5 commandment, it's clear that we're supposed to keep the Sabbath, which meant not working at all. When it came to capital punishment, Deuteronomy 22, there was certain death for people who were caught in an adulterous relationship. When it came to proportional force, Leviticus 24:20, so you have the famous eye for an eye. Now, when Jesus comes along, he is said to have fulfilled the law and not abolished it. Now, some of the things that were fulfilled was this certificate of divorce. In Matthew 19, it says that the Pharisees were testing him once again. Now, why would they be testing Jesus about this topic? Perhaps because they understood that Jesus was not totally in line with the Mosaic commandment, perhaps. In verse 7, why then did Moses command the people to have a certificate of divorce available? Well, Jesus goes on to say that it was because of their hard-heartedness. In other words, they were stubborn people, they were sinful people, and they tended to commit sin. So God allowed for them to divorce. But Jesus, in this section of Matthew 19, clearly says that it was not meant to be that way from the beginning of creation. So it's obvious here that the certificate of divorce is abolished, it's done away with. Now, in John 5, he says that just like God the Father works every day, so does the Son. In other words, Jesus has been given by God the Father authority to waive, be free of the Sabbath. That's why he's able to heal. That's why he's able to work on the Sabbath, clearly, many times. When it came to capital punishment in John 7, the famous story about the adulterer, Jesus does not agree with the command to stone the adulterer there. He offers mercy instead of the capital punishment that was mandated under the law of Moses. The same with holy wars. Obviously, Jesus didn't go around supporting a violent revolution against the Roman Empire at the time, nor did he agree with those within his own group who might have belonged to violent revolutionary Jewish groups. Proportional force, the famous Matthew 5, Jesus, without qualification, says, love your enemy. Let's look further into John 5, where Jesus is said to be equal to God in authority regarding the Sabbath. The Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. In different ways, the rabbis also argued that God's work goes on the Sabbath and that he is uninterruptedly active as sustainer and judge of the world. On the basis of these considerations, the saying of Jesus stresses the constancy of the divine work, which is not affected even by the Sabbath. But Jesus then continues that as the Father works, so do I. Jesus claims that divine authority is given to him as the Son, and hence that his work cannot tolerate any interruption even by the Sabbath. The Jews grasp what's being said. Jesus has not just broken the Sabbath, but is abolishing it. The story of the breaking of the Sabbath thus raises the decisive question whether the authority of Jesus as the one whom God has sent is recognized or not. Now let's look at the apostolic churches. What was the practice? So we have the story of the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, followed up in Acts 21, where the Torah is said to become a yoke. The apostolic church decides that the Gentiles in their midst should not be circumcised, therefore not follow the law of Moses. The food laws are waived by Paul in Romans 14, where he says, I am convinced in the Lord Jesus himself that all food and drink is fine. And this is the chapter about the weak and the strong within the church, that we sometimes have to tolerate those fellow Christians who are still Jews trying to work out their long-held traditions and their commandments to the law of Moses. The Jewish calendar has become a shadow, Paul says in Galatians 2, and they're part of the elements of the world. In Galatians 4 and in Romans 14:5, Paul says that there are no special days for Christians, no special religious days. And then we see that the early Jewish converts to Christianity went from the Sabbath to the Sunday. In 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2, for example, the collection of the poor is to be taken on the first of the week, as opposed to in the synagogue when it was performed during the Sabbath day. So, in essence, because Jesus, who had the authority to waive off the Sabbath, likewise gives that authority and freedom to his followers. Again, the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, in Mark 2:27, man and his needs are said to be of greater value than the commandment. The absolute obligation of the commandment is thus challenged. The second saying in verse 28 goes much further. The Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. The Christian community is confessing Jesus, the Son of Man, who as Lord Messiah, decides concerning the applying or transcending of the Sabbath. In his lordship, Sabbath casuistry comes to an end.